Fukushima. The word alone is enough to inspire terror in any seafood aficionado in the wake of the worst nuclear disaster in decades. Going on 8 years later, 50,000 households remain evacuated, and bans on fish and vegetables from around the disaster area have been in effect for years to protect the people from lingering radiation. Today, contaminated water from the plant is being stored to prevent it from spreading radiation into the environment, and an ingenious refrigeration system keeps the soil around the affected site frozen in an icy boundary meant to keep groundwater away. But how did this modern nuclear disaster start? And how did things get so bad? Let's take a look at the events of March 2011 minute by minute. Monday, March 7th, 2011. In a move that will prove to be eerily prophetic, the Tokyo Electric Power Company submits a report to Japan's Nuclear Safety Agency, highlighting the vulnerability of the plant to tsunami forces. The plant's seawall is nearly 6 meters high, and the report highlights an 1897 tsunami with 10.2-meter waves, which devastated the location the plant sits at today. Officials take note and make plans to review the strengthening of the seawalls at a future date. Friday, March 11th. 2:46 p.m. A 9.1 magnitude earthquake tears through the seafloor off the coast of Honolulu Island at a depth of 15 miles in the Earth's crust. At the Fukushima nuclear plant, emergency safety systems automatically kick on upon being struck by the first tremor, and reactors 1, 2, and 3 are automatically shut down. Reactors 4, 5, and 6 are currently undergoing maintenance and not operational. 2:47 p.m. The tremor is severe enough to have cut off the power plant from the national electricity grid. On-site, backup diesel generators start up. Their job is to continue circulating cooling water into the nuclear reactors, which, while shut down, are still incredibly hot and will take a long time to cool. Without this cooling water circulating around the reactor core, the core will overheat just like Chernobyl, causing a massive steam explosion. 2:52 p.m. Reactor 1's emergency cooling system, a safety relief valve, automatically opens in response to rising pressure from inside the reactor vessel. The valve is designed to vent dangerous buildups of steam in order to prevent an explosion. For the next hour, the valve will open and close automatically as it regulates the buildup of pressure inside the reactor. This one safety system is likely responsible for averting a catastrophic explosion. 3:27 p.m. The first tsunami strikes the 19-foot-high seawall, but the wall holds and protects the plant from major flooding. 3:30 p.m. Steam continues building to dangerous levels inside reactor number 1. The safety relief valve prevents an explosion, but the temperature of the steam is steadily climbing as the emergency condenser system meant to cool the steam fails. Workers are extremely concerned, but as long as the safety relief valve remains operational, the reactor vessel should not explode. Many believe that the worst is over and that the first tsunami was the only one they would have to deal with. 3:38 p.m. One of the backup diesel generators stops running. The rest continue running. But because all but one of the generators are located underground, there is concern of serious flooding from additional tsunami waves. 3:46 p.m. A 46-foot tsunami crashes into the seawall and overtops it, flooding the entire Fukushima facility. The diesel generators are all flooded and shut down, and their fuel tanks are washed away by roaring waves. Now all power has been lost in the facility, and all but the mechanical safety systems meant to operate without power are offline. Temperatures begin to rise inside the reactors, and only the remaining safety systems are keeping any check on the temperature rise, though they alone will not be enough to prevent a major disaster. 4 p.m. The Nuclear and Industrial Safety Agency of Japan begins post-disaster emergency procedures and convenes an emergency headquarters. Personnel contact all nuclear power plants in Japan in an attempt to ascertain their condition. The news from Fukushima is grim, but so far the exterior plant sensors have not detected any release of radioactivity into the surrounding environment. 6 p.m. Inside Reactor 1, water levels have fallen so low that the top of the nuclear fuel rods are now exposed to dry air inside the reactor vessel. Without water to radiate their heat onto, the temperature inside the reactor immediately begins climbing again. 6:18 p.m. Workers restore power to Reactor 1's emergency cooling system, and water once more begins circulating. Workers, however, are unaware of the massive boil-off of water inside the reactor. 7:02 p.m. Prime Minister Naoto Kan declares a nuclear emergency. The declaration is followed by announcements that no radiation leaks have been detected and it's merely a cautionary measure. 7:30 p.m. Fuel rods inside Reactor 1 are now fully exposed to air as water levels continue to drop. The incredible buildup of heat causes the rods to begin melting and pooling at the bottom of the reactor vessel as a molten slag heap of highly radioactive metal. 9 p.m. Workers fear that the dropping water levels inside Reactor 1 are inevitably going to lead to a Chernobyl-like steam explosion. The government issues an emergency evacuation order to all residents within 2 miles of the plant. Residents within 6.2 miles are told they can remain in their homes, but they should be prepared to evacuate nonetheless. Inside Reactor number 1, the pressure is at twice normal levels and climbing. Older power plant workers offer to take the place of the younger men on duty at the plant, knowing that disaster may be inevitable and preferring to place themselves at risk to radiation poisoning over the younger workers. Saturday, March 12th, 2:44 a.m. Emergency battery power for the high-pressure core flutter system, the main emergency cooling method for reactor number 3, runs out. Water begins boiling off inside the reactor vessel. 4:15 a.m. Inside reactor 3, the dropping water levels expose the fuel rods and temperature immediately skyrockets. 5:30 a.m. The situation inside reactor 1 is critical. Extremely high pressure threatens to explode the containment vessel at any moment. Officials have been arguing all night over a proposed and extremely risky maneuver which could cause a large explosion. And yet, if not attempted, the vessel is guaranteed to explode. At last, it's agreed to vent steam from directly inside the reactor, and the workers hold their breath as large volumes of steam is allowed to vent into the air above the plant. Not only is the steam slightly radioactive, but there is a large possibility of hydrogen having been formed inside the containment vessel due to the high pressure and temperatures, and it's feared that that could ignite after combining with oxygen. The venting is successful, and there's no explosion. 5:50 a.m. More emergency power is restored, allowing plant workers to pump fresh water into Reactor 1 in an attempt to cool the fuel rods. 6:50 a.m. Although workers do not realize that the entire core of reactor number 1 has completely melted and fallen to the bottom of the pressure vessel. With temperatures reaching over 2,190 degrees, the zirconium in the fuel rod splits the hydrogen from the water vapor in the steam inside the vessels. This causes a buildup of dangerous hydrogen gas. 10:58 a.m. Pressure inside reactor number 2 reaches critical levels, and once more workers gamble by venting off some of the radioactive steam to avoid an explosion. 3:30 p.m. Residents within 6 miles are now being evacuated. All fear a Chernobyl-style explosion at the power plant. 3:36 p.m. Hydrogen gas buildup inside the containment vessel of reactor number 1 reaches critical levels, and there's a massive explosion, cracking open the containment vessel but leaving the reactor core intact. 4 workers are injured and the concrete building that surrounds the reactor vessel collapses. 7 p.m. Workers begin pumping seawater directly into reactor number 1 in an attempt to keep the core cool. 7:25 p.m. In a bid to limit how much water becomes contaminated, Tokyo Electric Power Company orders that the seawater injection be halted. Plant boss Masao Yoshida orders his workers to continue pumping in seawater though. Ignoring TEPCO, he fears a meltdown more than the release of contaminated water. 9:40 p.m. The evacuation zone is extended to 12.4 miles. Sunday, March 13th, 2:42 a.m. The high-pressure coolant injection system inside reactor number 3 fails, and water levels immediately begin falling as the water is boiled off by the intense heat of the fuel rods. 5:10 a.m. Fukushima Unit 1 is declared an International Nuclear and Radiological Event Scale Level 4 event, signifying an accident with local consequences. 7 a.m. Water levels inside reactor number 3 have dropped so low that the top of the fuel rods are now exposed. 9 a.m. Reactor number 3's fuel rods begin to melt, causing a buildup in hydrogen gas. 1 p.m. Workers believe that reactor number 3 has suffered a partial meltdown, and reactors 1 and 3 are once more vented in order to relieve the growing pressure. The reactor containment vessels are refilled with water and boric acid, which absorbs neutrons and helps prevent more nuclear reactions from the fuel inside the reactors. Reactor number 2 has low water levels and high pressure, but is believed to be stable. Monday, March 14th, 11:01 a.m. Hydrogen gas buildup inside the containment vessel at reactor number 3 leads to an explosion, collapsing the building housing and container and injuring 6 workers. TEPCO announces no release of radioactive material, but the blast damages the water supply, helping keep Unit 2 cool. 1:15 p.m. Reactor number 2's cooling systems fail, and water levels immediately begin falling. 3 p.m. A large chunk of molten fuel inside reactor number 3 drops to the bottom of the pressure vessel and pools there. 6 p.m. Water levels inside reactor number 2 now reach the top of the fuel rods, and the temperature climbs as the exposed rods overheat. 8 p.m. Reactor number 2 now also enters a meltdown state. As its fuel rods begin to melt from the extreme heat, hydrogen gas once more builds up as the zirconium strips hydrogen away from the water vapor. Tuesday, March 15th, 11 a.m. A second explosion due to hydrogen gas buildup rocks reactor number 3, which damages the cooling systems of reactor number 2. 8 p.m. Reactor number 2 is now in worse condition than the other 2 reactors and is in a full-blown meltdown as most of the nuclear fuel drops to the bottom of the reactor pressure vessel. An explosion causes damage to Unit 2's containment system, and radiation levels rise significantly but quickly fall once more. Workers would go on to bravely battle the rising temperatures inside the stricken reactors and fuel rod storage pools. Ultimately, the Fukushima disaster would lead to a permanent quarantine zone around the stricken power plant, which lasts to this day, and to massive protests across the country over nuclear power. Yet, the plant used reactors that were over 40 years old and lacked many of the safety features of modern reactors. Additionally, in the years since the disaster, workers have come forward to state that much of the plant suffered from poor maintenance, and that many of the safety cooling systems had not been tested since the reactors were first installed 40 years ago. Do you love strange, unexpected stories that defy belief but are completely true? Then you'll love the new show I Am. Be one of the first to subscribe now and tell us who you want to see brought to life in I Am.